What you're about to witness will completely rewrite your understanding of revenge, hidden talent, and the explosive moment when a quiet teenager's carefully buried past erupts into her present reality in the most spectacular way imaginable. Picture this: a 17-year-old new girl named Emma Rodriguez standing in a high school parking lot, watching raw eggs drip down her windshield while three-star athletes laugh and film her humiliation for social media. But in exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, those same bullies would be face down on the asphalt, begging through choked sobs for mercy they'd never shown others. The question that haunted Jefferson High School for months afterward, the same question that would eventually reach the Colorado State Athletic Commission and trigger a federal investigation into youth sports corruption, was simple yet earth-shattering. How did the quiet new girl with no apparent athletic background execute a perfect triangle choke that left the school's 220-pound quarterback unconscious in under 15 seconds? I've spent countless hours investigating every detail of Emma Rodriguez's story and what I uncovered about her hidden identity, the conspiracy that destroyed her previous life, and the network of corrupt officials who tried to silence her forever will challenge everything you believe about justice, second chances, and the devastating cost of standing up for what's right. This isn't just another high school bullying story. This is the untold account of how one teenager's courage exposed a criminal enterprise that had been systematically destroying young athletes across 3 states, and how her refusal to stay silent ignited a movement that continues transforming youth sports today. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning that would forever change Jefferson High School began like any other Tuesday in Riverside Heights, Colorado. Emma Rodriguez pulled her beaten Honda Civic into the student parking lot at exactly 7:45, 15 minutes before first period, just as she had every day for the past 3 weeks since transferring to her new school. At 17, Emma possessed the kind of understated presence that allowed her to move through crowded hallways virtually unnoticed, her dark brown hair always tied back in a simple ponytail, her small frame hidden beneath oversized hoodies that had seen better days. The deliberate invisibility wasn't accidental. 3 weeks of careful observation had taught Emma exactly how Jefferson High's social ecosystem functioned, and staying beneath the radar of its apex predators had become her primary survival strategy. The school catered to Riverside Heights affluent families where BMWs and Mercedes dominated the student parking lot, and weekend conversations revolved around ski trips to Aspen and spring break vacations in Europe. Emma's Honda, with its faded paint and duct-taped side mirror, announced her outsider status to anyone paying attention. Most students hurried past without a second glance, which suited Emma perfectly. What none of them could have guessed was that the quiet girl carefully avoiding eye contact had once been featured on the cover of Colorado Youth Athletics magazine. Hidden beneath those baggy clothes was a lean, precisely conditioned frame that had dominated competition mats across the Mountain West region. The small scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible unless someone looked closely, told the story of her final tournament 8 months earlier, the night her world had collapsed in front of 300 spectators and fundamentally altered the trajectory of her life. Emma's mother, Dr. Maria Rodriguez, worked 16-hour shifts at Riverside General Hospital to afford their modest apartment on the wrong side of town. The decision to transfer schools mid-senior year hadn't been choice but necessity, driven by circumstances that Emma had never fully explained to her mother. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with family members who deserved the truth. Jefferson High's student body remained blissfully unaware that their newest classmate carried more athletic credentials than their entire varsity program combined. Emma's previous achievements, her state championship titles, her national tournament appearances, even her coaching certifications, had been systematically erased from public records following events that still gave her nightmares. The official explanation cited eligibility violations and conduct detrimental to the sport, but Emma knew the real reason her accomplishments had vanished from Colorado youth athletics history. Sometimes, telling the truth about powerful people carried consequences that lasted far longer than anticipated. The morning routine that had kept Emma safe for 3 weeks involved arriving early enough to claim a parking spot in the furthest corner of the lot, closest to the back exit, that would allow quick departure if situations became uncomfortable. She'd learned to time her movements between classes to avoid crowded hallways, eat lunch in the library rather than the cafeteria, and maintain the carefully cultivated persona of a unremarkable transfer student who wanted nothing more than to graduate quietly and disappear. But carefully laid plans meant nothing when they collided with the particular brand of entitled cruelty that thrived in environments where wealth and athletic success granted immunity from consequences. Emma had studied Jefferson High's power structure with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to analyzing tournament brackets. She knew exactly who the dangerous players were, understood their patterns of behavior, and had specifically designed her daily schedule to avoid crossing paths with the worst of them. Unfortunately, bullies rarely operated on predictable schedules, especially when they'd spent weeks planning something spectacular for their social media followers. As Emma gathered her textbooks from the passenger seat, completely focused on making it to first period without incident, she remained completely unaware that her 3 weeks of successful invisibility were about to end in the most violent and public way possible. The next 4 minutes would strip away every carefully constructed defense mechanism Emma had built around her new identity, expose secrets that powerful people had spent millions of dollars trying to bury, and transform a quiet Tuesday morning into the day that changed everything for everyone involved. Jefferson High School stood as a monument to suburban affluence, its red brick facade and manicured landscaping announcing to visitors that education here came with a premium price tag. The building itself sprawled across 47 acres of prime Riverside Heights real estate, featuring state-of-the-art athletic facilities, a performing arts center that rivaled many colleges, and technology labs equipped with equipment that most universities couldn't afford. Every surface gleamed with a kind of perpetual maintenance that only generational wealth could sustain, from the marble-floored lobby to the championship banners hanging in the gymnasium that celebrated decades of athletic dominance. The student parking lot served as an informal exhibition of family financial status, with luxury vehicles arranged in carefully observed hierarchies that reflected the social order governing every aspect of campus life. Senior athletes commanded the spots closest to the main entrance, their lifted trucks and sports cars displaying custom paint jobs, premium sound systems, and collegiate recruitment stickers that announced their future destinations. The Wellington family's contribution to this automotive display was particularly impressive. Chase's midnight blue Mustang convertible occupied the prime spot directly in front of the building, its pristine condition and personalized license plate reading Champ 1, leaving no doubt about the owner's self-perception. Emma's Honda occupied the automotive equivalent of social exile, parked beside the maintenance shed where the janitorial staff stored equipment, and where students who couldn't afford premium parking spots were relegated to compete for whatever spaces remained available. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or intentional, a daily reminder that Jefferson High operated according to unwritten rules that separated the worthy from the expendable, based primarily on family bank account balances, rather than personal merit or character. The school's academic reputation attracted families from across the region who could afford the premium associated with Riverside Heights addresses, but the real draw was the athletic programs that consistently produced Division I scholarship recipients and occasionally even professional athletes. Football dominated the autumn social calendar, with Friday night games drawing crowds that included college scouts, local media, and alumni whose donations kept the program operating at championship levels. Wrestling season brought its own intensity, with the team's state tournament appearances generating community pride and individual athlete recognition that opened doors to opportunities extending far beyond high school. Chase Wellington's position at the apex of this hierarchy wasn't accidental or temporary. His father, Mayor Richard Wellington, had played quarterback for Jefferson High 30 years earlier before earning a TIE scholarship to Colorado State University, where he'd met his wife during her sorority presidency. The family's return to Riverside Heights had been orchestrated specifically to position Chase for similar success, with private coaching, advanced training facilities, and strategic networking ensuring that every possible advantage was leveraged for maximum benefit. The Wellington family's annual donation to the athletic department exceeded the entire budget of most schools, purchasing influence that extended far beyond simple financial support. Ryan Mitchell and Alex Parker served as Chase's closest associates, their own family connections ensuring loyalty and mutual protection within the school's power structure. Ryan's father owned the largest construction company in 3 counties, building the luxury developments that housed most of Jefferson High's student body, while Alex's mother served as president of the school board, wielding administrative influence that complemented the athletic dominance her son's swimming achievements provided. Together, the three formed an untouchable nucleus of privilege that had never encountered meaningful opposition to their desires or behavior. Emma understood these dynamics with crystalline clarity, because surviving in competitive athletics had taught her to analyze power structures and identify potential threats before they became dangerous. Her weeks of observation had revealed patterns of behavior that extended beyond typical teenage social hierarchies into something more calculated and systematic. These weren't simply popular students enjoying their status, but young men who had learned to weaponize their advantages against anyone they perceived as threatening their position or simply convenient for their entertainment. The academic environment reflected this same stratification, with teachers and administrators maintaining careful neutrality when conflicts arose involving students whose families contributed significantly to school funding. Emma had witnessed 3 separate incidents where obvious infractions by prominent athletes resulted in minimal consequences, while less connected students faced suspension or worse for identical behavior. The message was clear and consistently reinforced. Justice at Jefferson High operated according to different standards, depending on who was involved and what kind of pressure their families could apply. Emma's strategy for navigating this environment drew from hard-learned lessons about institutional politics and the importance of avoiding unnecessary attention from powerful people who viewed opposition as personal insults, requiring immediate retaliation. Her previous school experience had taught her that fighting back against systematic unfairness often resulted in consequences extending far beyond the immediate conflict, particularly when the people being challenged possessed resources and connections that most teenagers couldn't comprehend. The daily routine she'd established involved careful timing and strategic positioning designed to minimize contact with problematic individuals while maintaining the academic performance necessary for college admission. Her grades remained consistently excellent, despite the emotional energy required for constant vigilance, partly because schoolwork provided welcome distraction from more complicated concerns about her past and future. The guidance counselor had suggested several extracurricular activities that might help her integrate socially, but Emma politely declined each invitation, understanding that increased visibility carried risks she couldn't afford. Her lunch periods were spent in the library's quiet corner, surrounded by academic texts that provided both legitimate study material and convenient camouflage for someone who preferred observation over participation. From this vantage point, she could monitor the cafeteria's social dynamics through the connecting window, while avoiding the complex navigation required for finding appropriate seating among established friend groups. The librarian, Mrs. Peterson, had grown accustomed to Emma's daily presence and occasionally recommended books that seemed to understand her situation without requiring explanations that Emma wasn't prepared to provide. The isolation was lonely but necessary, a calculated sacrifice that served multiple purposes beyond simple social survival. Emma's previous experiences had taught her that teenage friendships often involved sharing personal information that could become weaponized during conflicts, and her current circumstances required maintaining absolute control over what others knew about her background. Even well-meaning classmates might inadvertently reveal details that could attract. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Attention from people who still had reasons to ensure her continued silence about events that had occurred 8 months earlier. Every day brought small reminders of the different world she now inhabited, from classroom discussions about weekend activities she couldn't afford to college planning conversations that assumed family financial support she wouldn't receive. The contrasts weren't simply economic but cultural, reflecting different expectations about responsibility, accountability, and the relationship between privilege and obligation that seemed fundamentally foreign to most of her classmates' lived experiences. The morning routine that had worked perfectly for 3 weeks was about to encounter variables that no amount of careful planning could have anticipated, because bullies rarely announced their intentions or provided advance warning before striking their chosen targets. Emma's morning ritual of scanning the parking lot before exiting her vehicle had become as automatic as breathing, a habit formed through necessity rather than paranoia. Her dark eyes moved systematically across the rows of expensive cars, cataloging which vehicles belonged to potential threats and noting any unusual patterns in their positioning or occupancy. Most observers would have mistaken this behavior for typical teenage social anxiety, but Emma's assessment process operated according to tactical principles that had nothing to do with high school social hierarchies. The way she positioned her backpack when walking across campus revealed training that extended far beyond ordinary self-defense classes. The strap rested across her body in a configuration that allowed instant access to the contents while keeping both hands free for defensive movements, and her gait maintained perfect balance despite the deliberately casual appearance she projected. Her breathing remained controlled and rhythmic even when navigating crowded hallways, a technique that most 17-year-olds had never learned and would never need. Emma's choice of clothing served multiple purposes beyond simple camouflage from unwanted attention. The oversized hoodies and loose-fitting jeans concealed a physique that had been shaped by thousands of hours of intensive physical conditioning, but they also allowed unrestricted movement in directions that fashion-conscious teenagers rarely considered necessary. Her sneakers were selected for grip and mobility rather than style, with reinforced toe areas that suggested activities involving significantly more physical contact than typical academic pursuits. The small details of Emma's daily behavior painted a picture that none of her classmates possessed sufficient context to interpret correctly. The way she instinctively checked exits when entering any room, positioning herself with clear sightlines to multiple escape routes, spoke to training that emphasized tactical awareness over social comfort. Her habit of keeping her back to walls during conversations, maintaining enough distance from other students to react to sudden movements, and never allowing anyone to approach from her blind spots, reflected reflexes that had been drilled into muscle memory through repetitive practice. During gym class, Emma's performance was carefully calibrated to appear average despite capabilities that would have dominated every fitness test the school administered. She deliberately finished running exercises in the middle of the pack, lifting weights that represented a fraction of her actual strength, and executing basic movements with just enough competence to avoid attracting attention from the athletic coaches who might ask uncomfortable questions about her background. The restraint required for this performance was exhausting, demanding constant mental calculation to ensure her responses remained within expected parameters. Her knowledge of anatomy and physiology occasionally surfaced in unexpected moments, such as when a classmate complained about shoulder pain, and Emma automatically identified the specific muscle groups involved before catching herself and offering generic sympathy instead of the detailed rehabilitation advice that would have revealed her extensive understanding of sports medicine. These brief lapses required immediate course correction to maintain her carefully constructed persona of academic focus rather than athletic expertise. The scars that Emma kept hidden told stories she had no intention of sharing with curious classmates. The thin line across her left palm spoke to countless hours gripping training weapons, while the barely visible marks on her knuckles reflected contact with surfaces that weren't designed for comfort. Most significantly, the surgical scar near her hairline, concealed by strategic styling, marked the spot where emergency medical attention had been required following her final competitive appearance 8 months earlier. Emma's textbooks contained subtle modifications that would have puzzled anyone who examined them closely. Margin notes included terminology that belonged in advanced kinesiology courses rather than high school curriculum, with detailed analyses of leverage, fulcrum points, and biomechanical advantages that suggested familiarity with physical techniques extending far beyond academic theory. Her notebook sketches, seemingly random doodles created during boring lectures, actually depicted complex movement sequences and tactical positioning diagrams that reflected training in systematic combat applications. The way Emma unconsciously assessed other students revealed evaluation criteria that most teenagers never considered. She automatically noted their balance, reaction speed, physical conditioning, and potential reach advantages, categorizing classmates according to threat assessment protocols that had been ingrained through years of competitive analysis. Her mental database included detailed profiles of every student who had ever displayed aggressive behavior, mapping their movement patterns, identifying their physical weaknesses, and developing contingency plans for potential confrontations that she hoped would never materialize. Emma's relationship with physical pain differed dramatically from her classmates' experiences, a tolerance developed through training regimens that pushed human limitations in pursuit of competitive excellence. Minor injuries that would have sent other students to the nurse's office barely registered on her awareness, while her recovery time from exhaustion or minor trauma consistently amazed teachers who assumed her quick rebounds indicated natural resilience rather than learned adaptation to physical stress. Her understanding of violence extended beyond theoretical knowledge into practical experience that included both inflicting and receiving damage in controlled environments designed to simulate real-world applications. The precision with which she could predict the outcome of physical altercations, combined with her ability to identify the exact techniques required to end confrontations quickly and decisively, represented skills that most people never developed, and hopefully never needed. The meditation techniques that Emma practiced during quiet moments weren't derived from popular mindfulness applications or yoga classes, but from combat sports traditions that emphasized mental clarity under extreme pressure. Her ability to control her heart rate, regulate her breathing, and maintain focus despite emotional stress reflected training designed to optimize performance when facing opponents who were actively trying to cause physical harm. Emma's dietary choices and hydration habits followed patterns established through competitive athletics rather than typical teenage preferences. She instinctively avoided foods that would compromise reaction time or physical performance, maintained consistent meal timing that supported optimal energy levels, and consumed supplements that enhanced recovery and muscular function. These behaviors were so deeply ingrained that she rarely consciously considered the reasoning behind them. The way Emma's body responded to sudden noises or unexpected movements revealed reflexes that had been trained to respond to threats with immediate defensive positioning. A dropped textbook or slammed locker door would trigger a subtle shift in stance that positioned her for optimal reaction to physical attack, reactions that reset to normal positioning so quickly that observers might question whether they had actually seen anything unusual. Most tellingly, Emma's eyes constantly tracked movement patterns and potential weapons in her environment, automatically cataloging anything that could be used for attack or defense in emergency situations. Her spatial awareness extended to monitoring multiple potential threats simultaneously while maintaining normal conversation, a skill that required years of practice to execute, without revealing the underlying tactical assessment taking place. These accumulated details painted a portrait of someone whose background included systematic training in physical confrontation at levels that few civilians ever experienced. But Emma's commitment to maintaining her civilian identity meant that these capabilities remained carefully hidden from everyone around her, waiting for circumstances that would force their revelation. Chase Wellington's arrival at Jefferson High School each morning resembled a presidential motorcade more than a teenager heading to class. His midnight blue Mustang convertible announced his presence 3 blocks away, the custom exhaust system's aggressive rumble echoing off the expensive homes lining Riverside Heights' tree-lined streets. The vehicle itself represented more than transportation. It served as a mobile throne, from which Chase surveyed his domain and reminded everyone within sight of their place in the carefully maintained social order that governed every aspect of campus life. At 18, Chase possessed the kind of commanding physical presence that came from genetic advantages reinforced by unlimited access to elite training facilities. His 6'3" frame carried 215 pounds of muscle that had been sculpted through years of private coaching, specialized nutrition programs, and performance enhancement protocols that his family's wealth made readily accessible. His blonde hair maintained perfect styling regardless of weather conditions, and his blue eyes held the cold confidence of someone who had never encountered meaningful opposition to his desires. The Wellington family legacy at Jefferson High stretched back 3 generations, with Chase's grandfather having served on the school board during the construction of the current facility, his father earning all-state honors before his successful college career, and now Chase positioned to surpass both predecessors through achievements that seemed predetermined rather than earned. The family's influence extended beyond simple athletic success into every aspect of school operations, from curriculum decisions to personnel hiring, ensuring that the institution functioned according to Wellington family priorities. Chase's daily entourage reflected the careful cultivation of strategic alliances that his father had taught him were essential for maintaining long-term power. Ryan Mitchell emerged from the passenger seat of the Mustang with the solid confidence of someone whose family controlled significant economic influence throughout the region. At 17, Ryan's stocky build and aggressive demeanor perfectly complemented his wrestling achievements. But his real value to Chase lay in his family's construction empire, which employed hundreds of local residents and contributed millions of dollars annually to area economic development. Alex Parker completed the triumvirate from his position in the Mustang's back seat, his lean swimmer's physique, and calculating intelligence, serving as the group's strategic planner and social media coordinator. Alex's mother's position as school board president provided inside information about administrative decisions and advance warning of any potential challenges to their operational freedom. His role involved documenting their activities for social media distribution while ensuring that any evidence of questionable behavior disappeared before reaching authorities who might impose consequences. The trio's morning routine involved a systematic survey of campus territory that reinforced their dominance while identifying opportunities for entertainment at other students' expense. They moved through the parking lot with the casual arrogance of apex predators, commenting loudly on various vehicles and their owners, distributing social approval or condemnation according to criteria that shifted based on their mood and current objectives. Their conversations included references to weekend parties that excluded most of their classmates, vacation destinations that required private aircraft access, and future plans that assumed continued privilege without corresponding responsibility. Chase's relationship with school authority figures represented a masterclass in manipulating institutional power structures to avoid accountability while maximizing operational freedom. His interactions with teachers combined just enough respect to avoid direct confrontation with subtle reminders of his family's influence over their employment security. The quarterly donations that Mayor Wellington made to various school programs ensured that any complaints about Chase's behavior underwent careful review before reaching official channels, with most incidents being resolved through quiet conversations that emphasized understanding rather than punishment. The group's entertainment preferences focused on psychological manipulation of students they perceived as vulnerable or inferior, with particular attention to individuals whose lack of social connections made retaliation unlikely. Their techniques had been refined through years of practice, incorporating social media humiliation, strategic exclusion from important events, and carefully orchestrated embarrassment campaigns designed to isolate victims while entertaining spectators. The systematic nature of their cruelty reflected planning and coordination that extended far beyond spontaneous teenage meanness. Ryan's wrestling background provided the group with detailed knowledge of physical intimidation techniques that stopped just short of actionable assault, while his aggressive personality served as the enforcement mechanism for Chase's strategic decisions. His family's blue-collar roots, despite their current wealth, gave him credibility with students from working-class backgrounds, allowing him to gather intelligence about potential targets while maintaining plausible deniability about the group's intentions. Alex's academic achievements and technology skills enabled sophisticated cyberbullying campaigns that could destroy reputations while maintaining legal distance from direct harassment charges. His understanding of social media algorithms allowed their content to achieve maximum distribution among target audiences, while his mother's administrative access provided early warning of any official investigations into their activities. The combination of his intellectual capabilities and institutional protection made him the most dangerous member of their organization. The trio's selection criteria for targeting victims involved careful assessment of multiple factors, including family financial status, social connections, potential for interesting reactions, and likelihood of effective resistance. They preferred students who were isolated, recent transfers, or dealing with personal problems that made them psychologically vulnerable to sustained harassment. Emma Rodriguez had checked multiple boxes on their evaluation matrix from the moment she arrived at Jefferson High, but her consistent success at avoiding their attention had made her a particularly appealing challenge. Chase's personal motivations for pursuing increasingly elaborate harassment campaigns stemmed from deeper psychological needs that unlimited privilege and universal deference had failed to satisfy. The adrenaline rush from dominating others provided temporary relief from the suffocating pressure of maintaining perfect performance in every aspect of his carefully scripted life, while the social media validation from documenting his conquests offered proof of his continued relevance among peers whose approval he simultaneously craved and resented. The group's operational planning for major harassment events involved weeks of preparation, including surveillance of target routines, identification of optimal timing and locations, coordination of recording equipment for social media distribution, and development of plausible explanations for any authority figures who might question their activities. Their success rate in avoiding serious consequences had bred overconfidence that would prove catastrophic when applied to targets whose backgrounds they had failed to investigate thoroughly. Emma Rodriguez represented the perfect storm of characteristics that triggered Chase Wellington's predatory instincts. A quiet transfer student with no visible social connections, driving a car that announced her family's financial limitations, and maintaining the kind of deliberate invisibility that suggested interesting secrets waiting to be exposed for public entertainment. Her 3 weeks of successful avoidance had only intensified their interest, while providing ample time for planning something spectacular enough to generate the viral social media content that fed their need for constant validation and attention. The morning that would forever alter the trajectory of multiple lives began with Chase Wellington's decision that Emma Rodriguez had remained beneath his notice for far too long, and that correcting this oversight required a demonstration significant enough to remind everyone at Jefferson High School exactly who controlled their daily existence. The confrontation that would reshape Jefferson High School's understanding of power, privilege, and consequence began with something as simple as Chase Wellington's decision that Tuesday morning offered perfect conditions for creating viral content. The autumn air carried just enough chill to ensure students would linger in the parking lot rather than hurrying directly inside, providing an ideal audience for the spectacle he'd been planning since identifying Emma Rodriguez as his next target 3 days earlier. Chase's strategic mind had spent considerable time analyzing Emma's routines, noting her consistent arrival time, her isolated parking location, and most importantly, her complete lack of social connections who might complicate the aftermath of whatever entertainment he decided to provide. Her careful avoidance of his group's attention had only increased his interest, suggesting hidden depths that would make her eventual humiliation more satisfying than the typical quick victories he'd grown accustomed to achieving. Ryan Mitchell emerged from the Mustang carrying a plastic grocery bag whose contents would serve as the opening salvo in what Chase intended to be a masterfully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare. The eggs inside had been specifically selected for maximum visual impact when they met their target, their organic origins ensuring that the resulting mess would require significant cleanup while avoiding any charges more serious than simple vandalism. Alex Parker positioned himself with his phone ready, multiple social media applications prepared to broadcast whatever unfolded to their combined followers who had learned to expect regular entertainment at other students' expense. Emma's Honda Civic sat in its usual isolated corner of the parking lot, the morning sun highlighting the vehicle's numerous imperfections while emphasizing its owner's economic circumstances to anyone observing the stark contrast with the luxury automobiles surrounding it. The car's position near the maintenance shed ensured privacy for whatever activities Chase had planned, while providing optimal camera angles for Alex's documentation requirements. The timing of their approach had been calculated to coincide with the arrival of other students who would serve as witnesses to Emma's humiliation, their phone cameras creating multiple angles of coverage that would ensure nothing important was missed during the few minutes Chase expected his entertainment to require. His experience with similar operations had taught him that spontaneous audience participation often produced the most engaging content, with bystanders frequently contributing commentary or additional harassment that enhanced the overall impact. Emma's routine morning security scan detected the approaching threat while Chase's group was still 50 yards away, her trained awareness recognizing predatory movement patterns that most teenagers would have missed entirely. The purposeful nature of their advance, combined with Alex's obvious preparation for recording, triggered tactical assessment protocols that had been drilled into her muscle memory through years of competitive training. Her breathing remained controlled while her body language continued projecting the casual indifference that had served as her primary defense mechanism throughout 3 weeks of successful invisibility. Chase's opening move involved positioning his group in a triangle formation that blocked Emma's most direct path to the school building, while maintaining enough distance to appear casual to any faculty members who might observe their interaction from inside. His understanding of institutional blind spots had identified this particular area as offering maximum privacy, despite its apparent openness, with security cameras positioned too far away to capture audio, and most administrators remaining inside until the official start of classes. The first egg struck Emma's windshield with a wet splat that echoed across the parking lot, bright yellow yolks spreading across the glass in patterns that immediately attracted attention from nearby students. Ryan's throwing technique displayed the accuracy that came from years of athletic training, while his broad grin indicated personal satisfaction with the precision of his aim. The impact sent viscous liquid streaming down the glass in rivulets that would require professional cleaning to remove completely. Emma remained motionless beside her vehicle, her expression revealing nothing while her mind rapidly calculated response options and their likely consequences. Flight remained possible but would require abandoning her backpack and accepting whatever escalation Chase chose to pursue during her absence from school. Verbal protest would provide additional entertainment for their social media documentation while accomplishing nothing productive. Physical retaliation carried enormous risk given the group's size advantage and their family's influence over local law enforcement and school administration. The second egg found its target on the Honda's roof, creating an explosion of shell fragments and organic matter that splattered across multiple surfaces while generating cheers from Chase's growing audience of spectators. Several students had gathered at safe distances, their phones recording everything while maintaining enough space to avoid becoming collateral damage in whatever entertainment was unfolding. The systematic nature of the attack became clear as Ryan reached into his bag for additional ammunition. Chase stepped forward with the confident swagger of someone who had never faced meaningful consequences for his actions, his voice carrying across the parking lot with enough volume to ensure his words would be captured by every recording device within range. His tone combined false concern with obvious mockery, the careful modulation of someone practiced in maintaining plausible deniability while delivering maximum psychological impact to his chosen victim. "Hey there, new girl," Chase announced, his words dripping with the casual cruelty that had become his signature among Jefferson High's student body. "Looks like someone's having a rough morning. Maybe you should have thought about that before parking in our section of the lot." His emphasis on ownership reflected the territorial mindset that governed his approach to every aspect of school life, treating public spaces as personal property to be defended against unwanted intrusion. Emma's response emerged as barely above a whisper, her voice carrying just enough steel to suggest depths that Chase's limited experience with genuine opposition had never taught him to recognize. "This is student parking. I have as much right to be here as anyone else." Her words maintained perfect control despite the escalating situation, drawing from training that emphasized tactical de-escalation, while preserving defensive options for situations where retreat became impossible. Ryan's laugh carried the harsh edge of someone who had learned to interpret any resistance as personal challenge requiring immediate escalation. His wrestling background had taught him to view conflict through the lens of dominance and submission, with compromise representing weakness that invited additional attacks from future opponents. The third egg left his hand with enough force to crack against the Honda's passenger window, creating a spiderweb of damage that would require expensive repair. Alex continued his documentation duties while providing running commentary for their social media audience, his words carefully chosen to frame the encounter as harmless fun rather than systematic harassment. His understanding of legal boundaries allowed him to craft a narrative that would protect the group from serious consequences while maximizing entertainment value for their online followers. The careful staging of their attack would later be presented as spontaneous interaction rather than premeditated assault. "Come on, Emma," Alex called out, his tone adopting the false friendliness that psychologists recognize as a manipulation technique designed to confuse victims about the attacker's true intentions. "We're just having a little fun. Don't be so serious about everything. It's just a car, right? I'm sure your family can afford to get it cleaned." His deliberate reference to her economic circumstances added another layer of humiliation to the attack. The gathering crowd of spectators had grown to include nearly 30 students, their phones creating a digital record that would survive long after the immediate incident concluded. Social media notifications were already beginning to ping, as live streams brought the confrontation to hundreds of additional viewers who would share, comment, and contribute to the viral spread of whatever climax Chase had planned for his morning's entertainment. Emma's tactical assessment continued calculating variables, while her body prepared for escalation that seemed increasingly inevitable. Chase's group had committed to a course of action that required a satisfying conclusion for their audience, making peaceful resolution unlikely unless she provided the kind of submissive reaction that would feed their psychological needs. Her training had taught her to recognize the signs of predators who required complete domination of their victims to achieve satisfaction. The fourth egg struck her directly in the shoulder, the shell impact sharp enough to sting while the organic content spread across her hoodie in patterns that would create lasting stains. Ryan's accuracy suggested practice with targeting human beings rather than inanimate objects, while his expression indicated personal enjoyment of her inability to retaliate effectively. The physical assault crossed legal boundaries that transformed the incident from vandalism into criminal behavior. Chase's smile broadened as he observed Emma's continued restraint, interpreting her self-control as evidence of fear rather than tactical preparation. His experience with previous victims had taught him that this moment represented the psychological breaking point, where targets typically began begging for mercy or offering humiliating concessions in exchange for the harassment to end. Emma's silence confused him, while simultaneously increasing his determination to extract the satisfying reaction his ego required. "What's wrong, Emma?" Chase taunted, stepping closer while maintaining enough distance to avoid any sudden defensive movements she might attempt. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're just thinking about how you're going to explain this mess to Mommy when she sees what happened to her little baby's car." His reference to her family added personal insult to the physical assault, while revealing research into her background that made the attack feel more invasive than random harassment. The fifth egg found its mark on Emma's backpack, the impact distributing organic matter across textbooks and personal items that would require replacement if the damage proved irreparable. The systematic destruction of her property demonstrated malicious intent that elevated the incident beyond simple bullying into criminal behavior that could result in serious legal consequences if properly documented and reported to appropriate authorities. Emma's breathing remained controlled while her muscles began subtle preparations for the violent response that 3 weeks of careful restraint had successfully avoided. Her training had taught her to recognize the moment when de-escalation became impossible, and survival required ending threats quickly and decisively. Chase Wellington's escalating aggression suggested they had reached that critical point, despite her best efforts to remain invisible. The crowd's energy had shifted from curious entertainment to bloodthirsty anticipation, as spectators recognized that something significant was building toward a climax that would provide content worth sharing across multiple social media platforms. The collective psychology of mob mentality was beginning to emerge as individual moral responsibility dissolved into group dynamics that encouraged increasingly extreme behavior. Ryan reached into his bag for the sixth egg, while Chase prepared the verbal assault that would trigger the explosive conclusion none of them were prepared to handle. His confidence had grown with each successful attack, feeding the narcissistic hunger that drove his need to humiliate others in increasingly public ways. The lack of resistance from Emma had convinced him that she represented the perfect victim for his most ambitious social media content yet. "You know what I think, Emma?" Chase continued, his voice rising to ensure every spectator could hear his words clearly. "I think you're exactly what's wrong with this school. Losers who think they can just show up and act like they belong here. Maybe it's time someone taught you about how things really work around here." His words carried the kind of casual menace that suggested systematic experience with intimidating people who couldn't fight back effectively. Emma's response came so quietly that Chase had to step closer to hear her clearly, bringing him within range of capabilities he had no context for understanding. "You made a mistake," she said simply, her voice carrying an edge that made Ryan pause with the sixth egg still in his hand. "A very serious mistake." The change in her tone was subtle but unmistakable, suggesting depths that none of them had anticipated encountering. Chase's confusion manifested as increased aggression, his interpretation of Emma's warning as defiance rather than the tactical assessment it actually represented. "Did you just threaten me?" he demanded, his voice rising to near-shouting levels that attracted attention from faculty members inside the building. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? My father is the mayor of this town. One phone call from me and your family won't be able to find work anywhere in Colorado." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that the confrontation was approaching its climax, while none of them suspected that they were about to witness something that would fundamentally alter their understanding of power dynamics and the dangerous assumptions that privilege could make about unknown opponents. Social media live streams were bringing the encounter to thousands of viewers who expected typical high school drama, rather than the explosive revelation that was about to unfold. Emma's transformation began so subtly that most observers missed the initial signs entirely. Her breathing shifted from stressed civilian patterns to the controlled rhythm of someone preparing for combat, while her stance adjusted to provide optimal balance and mobility despite appearing casual to untrained eyes. The change was as dramatic as a switch being thrown, but only someone with extensive martial arts experience would have recognized the significance of what they were witnessing. "Ryan, hit her with another one," Chase commanded, his need to maintain control over the situation overriding any tactical awareness that might have warned him about the danger he was creating. "And make sure Alex gets it all on video. This is going to be legendary." His focus on social media documentation would later provide ironclad evidence of premeditation and conspiracy that prosecutors would use to devastating effect. Ryan's sixth egg never reached its intended target because Emma Rodriguez was no longer the passive victim that 3 weeks of careful observation had led them to expect. The moment Ryan's arm began its throwing motion, Emma moved with fluid precision that seemed to bend the laws of physics, her hand intercepting the projectile mid-flight, while her body flowed into position for the devastating counterattack that would end the confrontation in seconds rather than minutes. The egg crumpled in Emma's grip with enough force to send shell fragments scattering across the asphalt, the casual display of hand strength shocking spectators who had never seen anything like it demonstrated by someone their age. Ryan's expression shifted from confident aggression to concerned confusion as his brain struggled to process what had just occurred. Alex's phone captured every frame of what happened next, creating evidence that would be analyzed by federal investigators and military training specialists for months afterward. Emma's first strike caught Ryan in the solar plexus with surgical precision, the impact calculated to disable his breathing without causing permanent damage while demonstrating control that spoke to extensive training in measured force application. Ryan doubled over, gasping for air that wouldn't come, his wrestling skills useless against an opponent whose techniques operated on entirely different principles than anything he had previously encountered. Chase lunged forward with the instinctive aggression of someone accustomed to using size and strength to resolve conflicts. But Emma was already moving, her foot sweeping his legs while her hands guided his momentum into a textbook hip toss that sent 215 pounds of quarterback crashing into the asphalt with enough force to knock the wind from his lungs. The technique was executed with mechanical precision that spoke to thousands of hours of practice against opponents far more skilled than Jefferson High's athletic elite. Alex stood frozen with his phone still recording, his mind struggling to process the sudden reversal of everything he thought he understood about power dynamics and physical confrontation. The girl they had been systematically humiliating for the past 10 minutes had just disabled 2 elite athletes with movements so quick and controlled that he was still trying to understand what he had witnessed. Emma straightened slowly, her breathing still controlled, her expression calm despite having just demonstrated abilities that none of her classmates had suspected she possessed. The parking lot had fallen silent except for Ryan's labored breathing and Chase's groans as he struggled to regain his feet. 30 spectators stood motionless, their phones still recording but their minds unable to process the complete reversal of expectations they had just witnessed. "Now, we can talk," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent parking lot with perfect clarity. "But first, Alex, you're going to delete that video and any others you've uploaded to social media. Ryan, you're going to clean my car. And Chase, you're going to explain why you thought attacking someone you know nothing about was a good idea." Her tone remained conversational despite having just executed techniques that belonged in professional combat sports rather than high school parking lots. Chase struggled to his feet, his expensive clothing torn and dirty, his perfect hair disheveled, and his blue eyes burning with humiliation and rage that came from being dominated in front of an audience that included dozens of classmates with recording devices. "You crazy psycho," he gasped, still trying to catch his breath from the impact with the asphalt. "You just assaulted me. I'm going to have you arrested. My father will destroy you for this." Emma's smile held no warmth whatsoever, the expression of someone who had heard similar threats before and found them less intimidating than their speakers intended. "Your father can try," she replied calmly. "But first he might want to ask himself how I knew those techniques. And more importantly, why someone with my background was hiding at Jefferson High School instead of competing where everyone could see these skills." The crowd murmured with excitement as Emma's words suggested layers of mystery that transformed the incident from simple violence into something far more intriguing. Alex's phone continued recording despite Chase's obvious desire for the documentation to cease, while Ryan remained doubled over, still struggling to recover his breathing from Emma's precisely placed strike. From across the parking lot, a figure emerged from behind the maintenance shed with the fluid movement of someone whose presence had been concealed deliberately rather than accidentally. Michael Torres stepped into view with the kind of predatory confidence that immediately identified him as someone far more dangerous than the high school athletes, who were still trying to understand what had just occurred. At 18, Michael possessed the lean build and calculating eyes of someone whose training extended far beyond scholastic athletics into professional combat applications. "Hello, Emma," Michael called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot with enough authority to make the gathered spectators instinctively step backward. I was wondering when you'd finally snap and show everyone what you really are. Took longer than I expected, honestly. You always did have better self-control than most people in our line of work. His words carried implications that made Emma's expression harden with recognition and something approaching fear. The crowd's attention shifted between Emma and Michael as the dynamic tension between them became obvious to everyone watching. This wasn't a random encounter, but a planned confrontation that had been building toward this moment through careful orchestration that none of the Jefferson High students had suspected. Alex's phone captured everything while his mind struggled to process the implications of what appeared to be a much larger conspiracy than simple high school bullying. Chase's confusion manifested as renewed aggression, despite his recent demonstration of Emma's capabilities. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice carrying the entitled authority of someone unaccustomed to having strangers appear on what he considered his territory. "This is a private school. You can't just walk onto campus without permission." His attempt to assert control over the situation revealed his continued failure to understand the forces that were converging around him. Michael's laugh carried genuine amusement mixed with contempt for Chase's obvious ignorance about the situation he had stumbled into through his harassment campaign. "Private school," he repeated mockingly. "That's funny. Do you know what's really funny, though? You three idiots just forced Emma Rodriguez to blow 8 months of carefully maintained cover because you couldn't resist throwing eggs at someone you thought was helpless." His words carried implications that made several spectators begin backing away from what was clearly becoming a much more serious situation. Emma's tactical assessment shifted into high gear as Michael's presence confirmed her worst fears about why the harassment had escalated so quickly and systematically. This hadn't been random bullying, but a carefully orchestrated operation designed to force her into exactly the kind of public display that would expose her location and capabilities to people who had been searching for her since her disappearance from Boulder 8 months earlier. "Michael," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying across the parking lot with perfect clarity despite the emotional weight of addressing someone whose betrayal had destroyed everything she had worked to build in her previous life. "Still working with people who target children for money? I thought you might have developed some dignity during the past 8 months, but apparently some things never change." Her words carried enough steel to make him take a step backward, despite his obvious confidence in whatever plan had brought him to Jefferson High. The gathering crowd pressed closer, their phones capturing every word of a confrontation that was rapidly revealing layers of complexity that none of them had anticipated when they gathered to watch Emma's humiliation. Social media notifications continued pinging as live streams brought the encounter to thousands of viewers who were witnessing something far more significant than typical high school drama unfolding in real time. Ryan finally recovered enough breath to speak, his voice still strained from Emma's precisely placed strike. "This is insane," he gasped, looking between Emma and Michael with growing awareness that he had become involved in something far beyond his understanding or ability to control. "Chase, we need to call someone. This isn't normal high school stuff anymore." His wrestling experience had taught him to recognize when he was facing opponents whose skills exceeded his ability to compete effectively. Michael stepped closer to Emma while maintaining enough distance to avoid the kind of sudden attack that had disabled Chase and Ryan so efficiently. His movement patterns revealed training that matched or possibly exceeded Emma's demonstrated capabilities, while his expression suggested familiarity with her techniques that came from extensive previous experience rather than simple observation. "You know why I'm here, Emma," Michael continued, his voice adopting the reasonable tone of someone trying to negotiate a peaceful resolution to what everyone present could sense was building toward explosive violence. "The people I work with have been very patient about your disappearance, but 8 months is long enough. They want their property back, and they want the information you took when you ran away from Boulder." His words carried implications about theft and conspiracy that elevated the confrontation far beyond simple personal conflict. Emma's expression hardened as Michael's demands confirmed her suspicions about the forces that had been pursuing her since her escape from the systematic corruption that had destroyed her competitive career. "Property," she repeated, her voice carrying enough controlled fury to make several spectators take additional steps backward. "Is that what they're calling it now? Because I remember being told that exposing systematic doping programs and match-fixing operations was somehow theft rather than whistleblowing." The revelation hit the gathered crowd like a thunderbolt, transforming their understanding of what they were witnessing from simple high school conflict into exposure of criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond Jefferson High School. Alex's phone continued recording while his mind struggled to process the implications of accidentally documenting what appeared to be confession of serious criminal activity by multiple parties. Chase's confusion manifested as continued attempts to assert control over a situation that had clearly spiraled far beyond his ability to influence or understand. "Doping programs," he repeated loudly. "What are you talking about? This is high school, not professional sports. Nobody cares about that stuff here." His inability to grasp the significance of what was being revealed demonstrated the limitation of his worldview despite his family's prominent position in local politics. Michael's patience with Chase's interruptions finally exhausted itself, as his mission requirements demanded ending the public exposure that Emma's forced revelation was creating. "Shut up, kid," he snapped, his voice carrying enough menace to make Chase instinctively step backward despite his size advantage. "Adults are talking about things that could get you killed if you knew too much about them. Maybe stick to throwing eggs and let people who understand real consequences handle this conversation." Emma recognized the shift in Michael's demeanor as preparation for the violent resolution that his employers had probably authorized if peaceful negotiation failed to achieve their objectives. Her own stance adjusted subtly as muscle memory prepared for the kind of high-stakes combat that bore no resemblance to the controlled demonstration she had given Chase's group. This would be fighting for survival against someone whose training matched her own, and whose moral limitations were far more flexible than anything she was prepared to compromise. Jennifer Hayes emerged from the school building with the purposeful stride of someone whose military background had taught her to recognize developing tactical situations that required immediate intervention. At 29, Jennifer possessed the kind of situational awareness that came from years of military intelligence work, and the confrontation unfolding in the parking lot displayed every characteristic of an operation that had escalated beyond its original parameters. "Federal agents are en route," Jennifer announced loudly enough for everyone present to hear clearly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to taking control of volatile situations. "Everyone with recording devices needs to keep them active and back away to a safe distance. This is now an active federal investigation into criminal conspiracy and witness intimidation." Her words transformed the gathering from curious spectators into essential evidence gatherers whose documentation would be crucial for whatever legal proceedings followed. Michael's expression shifted from confident negotiation to tactical assessment, as Jennifer's announcement revealed the presence of law enforcement resources that complicated his mission parameters significantly. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket in a motion that Emma recognized as preparation for weapons deployment, triggering her own immediate response as the situation crossed the threshold from verbal confrontation into active combat zone. Emma's movement seemed to violate physical laws as she closed the distance between herself and Michael in a fluid burst of speed that left spectators struggling to follow what had occurred. Her techniques operated according to principles that belonged in professional mixed martial arts rather than parking lot confrontations, each strike and defensive maneuver executed with precision that spoke to training at the highest levels of competitive combat sports. Michael's defensive response revealed skills that matched Emma's capabilities while confirming her suspicions about his employment by organizations whose training budgets exceeded those of most government agencies. The exchange lasted only seconds but involved techniques that most spectators had never seen outside of professional competition, with both combatants demonstrating abilities that transformed the confrontation from simple violence into an exhibition of elite-level martial arts. The conclusion came when Emma's signature triangle choke found its target with mechanical precision, cutting off blood flow to Michael's brain while avoiding damage to his windpipe in a display of control that spoke to thousands of hours of practice against resisting opponents. Michael's struggles grew weaker as consciousness faded, his body going limp, as Emma maintained the hold just long enough to ensure complete incapacitation without permanent injury. Chase, Ryan, and Alex stood frozen as they watched someone their age execute techniques that belonged in professional competition rather than high school confrontations. Their understanding of teenage capabilities fundamentally altered by witnessing skills that most adults never developed. The systematic nature of Emma's training became obvious to anyone with eyes to see, raising questions about her background that none of them had anticipated when they decided to target her for their morning entertainment. Jennifer approached the scene with her phone already connected to federal law enforcement agencies whose jurisdiction extended to the kinds of criminal conspiracies that Michael's presence suggested. "Emma Rodriguez," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the silent parking lot. "I've been investigating the Boulder athletics scandal for 6 months. The federal task force wants to debrief you about the evidence you gathered before your disappearance, and they're prepared to offer witness protection in exchange for your cooperation. Emma remained in position over Michael's unconscious form while processing Jennifer's offer and the implications of finally being able to tell her story to people with authority to act on the information she possessed. 8 months of hiding had taken a psychological toll that she was only beginning to acknowledge, and the prospect of legitimate protection from the criminal organization that had destroyed her previous life offered hope that she had almost given up expecting. "The evidence is hidden in 3 separate locations," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of finally being able to share information that had nearly gotten her killed multiple times. "Digital files, physical documents, and recorded conversations that prove systematic corruption reaching into state athletic commissions and federal oversight agencies. Everything you need to prosecute the people who've been destroying young athletes for profit." The gathering crowd of spectators continued recording as federal agents arrived on scene with the kind of coordinated response that suggested prior surveillance and preparation for exactly this kind of encounter. Their professional handling of Michael's unconscious form and immediate securing of the scene indicated familiarity with the criminal organization Emma had been hiding from, and the significance of her testimony to ongoing investigations. Chase Wellington found himself handcuffed and placed in federal custody not for his bullying activities, but because his escalation of harassment against Emma had been orchestrated by criminal conspiracy to force her exposure. His father's political connections proved useless against federal charges related to obstruction of justice and witness intimidation that carried serious prison time for anyone convicted of participating in the scheme. Ryan Mitchell and Alex Parker faced similar charges despite their claims of ignorance about the larger conspiracy, their documented participation in systematic harassment, providing evidence of criminal behavior that federal prosecutors intended to pursue, regardless of their family's local influence. The social media content they had created to document Emma's humiliation became evidence of premeditation that would be used against them in court proceedings. The investigation that followed Emma's revelation exposed a criminal network that had been systematically corrupting youth athletics across multiple states, using threats, violence, and financial manipulation to control competition outcomes and exploit young athletes for profit. Her testimony provided the missing pieces that federal investigators needed to secure convictions against dozens of people whose criminal activities had destroyed countless lives over several years. Emma's decision to finally break her silence triggered a cascade of additional witnesses coming forward with similar stories of corruption, intimidation, and criminal behavior that had been concealed through the same tactics that had forced her into hiding. The courage she displayed in Jefferson High School's parking lot inspired other victims to seek justice, rather than accepting the silence that had protected criminals at the expense of their victims. The transformation of Jefferson High School's culture began immediately as students who had witnessed Emma's courage began questioning their own participation in systems that allowed bullying and harassment to flourish without consequence. The viral videos of her confrontation with Chase's group became symbols of resistance against institutional indifference to systematic cruelty that had been normalized through administrative inaction. 6 months after the parking lot confrontation, Emma Rodriguez stood before a congressional committee investigating corruption in youth athletics. Her testimony broadcast to millions of viewers who learned about the systematic exploitation that had been hidden behind the facade of competitive sports. Her courage to speak truth to power inspired legislation that transformed oversight of youth athletics while providing protection for future whistleblowers. Chase Wellington served 18 months in federal prison for his role in witness intimidation conspiracy, his sentence reduced through cooperation with investigators who used his testimony to expose the full scope of the criminal organization's operations. His family's political dynasty crumbled as connections to criminal activity became public knowledge, teaching an entire community about the real cost of using privilege to avoid accountability. Emma's mother, Dr. Maria Rodriguez, finally learned the complete truth about why her daughter had insisted on transferring schools and maintaining such careful invisibility during their time in Riverside Heights. The revelation brought them closer together while confirming Maria's pride in her daughter's courage to do what was right, despite enormous personal cost and risk. The Emma Rodriguez Foundation emerged from settlement money paid by organizations found liable for the systematic corruption that had nearly destroyed her life, providing legal support and protection for young athletes facing similar intimidation and exploitation. The foundation's work expanded globally as her story inspired similar investigations in countries where youth athletics had been compromised by criminal conspiracy. Michael Torres received a 25-year federal sentence for his role in coordinating violence against witnesses and participants in criminal conspiracy that had operated across state lines for over a decade. His cooperation with investigators led to additional prosecutions while confirming the scope of criminal activity that Emma's courage had helped expose to federal law enforcement. Jefferson High School implemented comprehensive anti-bullying policies that included federal oversight and mandatory reporting requirements designed to prevent the kind of systematic harassment that had nearly exposed Emma to criminal violence. The school's culture transformed as students learned about the real consequences of participating in behavior that crossed legal and moral boundaries. Jennifer Hayes left her substitute teaching position to join the federal task force investigating youth athletics corruption, her military intelligence background proving invaluable for understanding the sophisticated criminal networks that had been exploiting young athletes. Her intervention in the parking lot confrontation earned commendations for preventing potential violence while preserving crucial evidence. The viral videos of Emma's confrontation continued spreading across social media platforms years after the original incident, inspiring countless individuals facing their own battles against institutional corruption and systematic harassment. Her story proved that one person's courage to resist injustice could trigger changes that protected countless others from similar exploitation and abuse. Emma returned to competitive athletics with federal protection and oversight, ensuring that her participation would be free from the corruption that had previously destroyed her career. Her achievements on the competition circuit served as inspiration for other athletes, while demonstrating that justice and integrity could prevail over criminal conspiracy when people refused to accept silence as the price of survival. The transformation of youth athletics oversight that followed Emma's testimony created protections for future generations of competitors, while establishing accountability mechanisms that prevented the kind of systematic exploitation that had flourished in the absence of effective regulation. Her courage to break 8 months of silence ultimately protected thousands of young athletes from criminal victimization. The legacy of that Tuesday morning confrontation in Jefferson High School's parking lot extended far beyond the immediate participants to inspire systemic changes that transformed competitive athletics at every level. Emma Rodriguez's refusal to remain silent when confronted with injustice created ripple effects that continued expanding years after her initial testimony to federal investigators. Today, Emma operates a training academy that emphasizes character development alongside athletic achievement, teaching young competitors that true strength comes from protecting others rather than dominating them. Her students learn that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite personal cost. Lessons that extend far beyond athletic competition into every aspect of their lives. The story of Emma Rodriguez proves that sometimes the people who fall hardest do indeed rise highest, not because suffering makes them special, but because surviving systematic injustice teaches them the true value of integrity, compassion, and the courage to stand up for others who cannot yet defend themselves. Her transformation from hidden victim to public advocate demonstrates that one person's refusal to surrender can fundamentally alter systems designed to crush individual resistance. The courage displayed in a high school parking lot continues inspiring people worldwide who face their own battles against corruption, harassment, and institutional indifference to systematic injustice. Emma's example proves that truth eventually prevails over power when individuals refuse to accept silence as the price of survival, creating hope for countless others who struggle against seemingly insurmountable opposition. The ghost who had hidden for 8 months returned not for revenge but for justice. And in a converted training facility in Colorado, champions continue rising every day, carrying forward the lessons of resilience, integrity, and protective strength that transform communities one student at a time. Her story reminds us that heroes aren't born from perfection, but forged through perseverance, and that the greatest victories belong to those who use their strength to lift others rather than standing alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.